want to share a few thoughts tonight, just off the back of what I thought was an amazing talk that Tim gave yesterday morning, and he was talking about isolation. And, I just loved the way that he put it when he was talking about how, as human beings, God has designed us to need one another. And my observation, you probably picked it up as well, is that actually if we look around in our part of the world, we're not, maybe we get the theory of that, but we're not very good at the practice of it. And one of the things that's been hitting the news just in recent years is the fact that in the Western world, one of our huge struggles is to do with loneliness. So politicians have been talking about it, and the government's trying to put money into trying to help us with loneliness. And that isn't a new problem. Mother Teresa, one of the things that she said famously is the greatest poverty that she ever encountered was the poverty of the Western world. It was a poverty of loneliness. And the way that she described loneliness was a feeling of being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for. And so what that means is loneliness is not something we just experience when we're in a room by ourselves. It means you can be lonely in the middle of a crowd this big, in the middle of the big top. You can be lonely in the middle of a youth group, in the middle of a church, in the middle of a classroom, in the middle of a home, in the middle of your street. You can be lonely surrounded by people, because what loneliness is it's that feeling that nobody really knows me. If I wasn't here, nobody would really miss me. And that's a feeling that we'd probably be amazed at how many of us struggle with it. I remember when I went to university, and it's always hard. It's a bit like starting school again, because you don't know anybody, and everybody has to try and make friends, and everybody's putting on a bit of a front. And I remember I had moments when I was a student of just real deep loneliness, even though I lived surrounded by other people the same age as me, literally like 2 seconds away across the corridor. I can remember going into the dinner hall and getting my tray of food and sort of hoping that once I got through the cafeteria into the sort of place where everybody's seated, that there would be a place for me, that there would be someone I knew, and if there wasn't, I would just sit awkwardly by myself. I remember that there was the entrance to the bar of my college. I had to walk past it to get to my room, and every night I walked past it, and I'd hear the sound of people having a great time inside, the sound of music and the sound of laughter, and I would have this little internal wrestle of, do I go in? And if I go in, what if there's no one I know? And then I'm just going to, I feel like no one would have noticed, but for me, I would have felt like everybody noticed, and I would have come out and have been an idiot, and so I felt like an idiot. So I struggled in those times to know, how do I engage, and what is it to have a friendship? And the solution to loneliness that God gives us is friendship. It's relationship with one another. And again, maybe this was just my experience, but nobody ever taught me how to have a friendship. They teach us loads of stuff when we're growing up. They make us learn all sorts of things at school. They even teach us about sex education, but no one teaches us about friendship. And yet, if I reflect on who I am as a person, how my life has gone, probably after meeting Jesus, my friendships have shaped me more than anything else. And yet we're left often just to make it up as we go along, sometimes with mixed results. And so I want to just share this evening just a few thoughts on friendship, and what is it to have a great friendship, and how do we have them, and what is it meant to look like? And as part of that, just before we get into the person that I want us to spend some time with in the Bible, one of the things that's important to understand about the way the Bible addresses friendship and the solution to loneliness is it doesn't talk about the answer being quantity of friends. It doesn't, what we can often believe, and it's probably social media that's caused it, is this myth that the more friends I have, the more popular I am, the lower my loneliness level will be. So if I can just get the number of my friends up on Facebook, or the number of my followers on Instagram, if I can just get that number a little bit higher, then my loneliness level will go low. And what we think is it's about quantity of relationship. And what the Bible shows us is that the antidote to loneliness is not popularity with a crowd, but it's closeness with just a few, just a closed handful of friends. It's having intimacy. So it's not about quantity of relationship, it's about quality. And so when I'm talking about friendship tonight, in this instance, I'm not talking about friendships that we're going to be able to have with a large number of people. I'm talking about friendships that we'll only ever have a handful of these sorts of friendships in our life. You will literally be able to count them on the fingers of one hand. But I'm talking about quality. And the astonishing thing is, and it's crazy for us because we're obsessed with numbers of relationships rather than the depth of relationship. But the astonishing thing is, and I've been discovering this in the Bible, but also in my experience, is that when we get the sorts of friendships that God holds out to us, then loneliness disappears. Not just for us, but for other people too. And there's loads of examples of great friendships in the scripture. David and Jonathan would be one. But I want to look at another one. It's found in a book called Ruth. And I want to look at the character of Ruth. If you have a Bible, you might want to open with me. You can find her book in the Old Testament. It's after the book of Judges. But again, Mike and I wrote a little chapter on this in our book, Lifelines. But Ruth's story, her book, begins not with Ruth, but with Naomi. So if you imagine the book is a bit like a film and you're kind of just there and the music, the introduction music is playing, what sometimes happens when you watch a film is it gives you a little bit of the background before the opening scene. And the background of Ruth's film is this. It starts with a lady called Naomi who lives in a place called Israel. She's Jewish with her husband. And in Israel, there's a famine, so the two of them decide they're going to up sticks and move to somewhere where there's food. And they end up in a land called Moab. And their two sons end up marrying local women, Moabite women, one of whom is called Orpah and the other one is called Ruth. And then what happens is life does not go well for Naomi. Her husband dies. Then both her sons die in Moab. So she's left there with her two daughters-in-law. And she decides that she's had enough. She's going to pack up sticks and go back home, back to the land of Israel. And that's the moment where the book of Ruth opens. So it's like the kind of the curtains drawn back on the movie. Suddenly you've got this picture, this scene of Ruth and Orpah, the daughters-in-law, and Naomi standing together on this dirt track underneath the Middle Eastern sun. And Naomi is starting to give them a speech that she's probably rehearsed a whole load of times in her head. And we can read the speech. It comes in Ruth chapter 1, starting in verse 8. It says this: Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Basically what she's saying is, I'm heading back to Israel. You two stay here. Stay in Moab. Don't come with me. And then it says, then she kissed them goodbye and they wept aloud. And they said to her, "We will go back with you to your people. We'll come with you." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old and I had to have another husband. And even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to two sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Now, as far as I can tell, that's the only recorded instance in history of anyone clinging to their mother-in-law. But it happens. It's in the Bible, so it's true. And Ruth says, "I'm not going anywhere." Orpah says, "Okay, fine." Ruth says, "No way." And then Ruth makes a speech of her own. And historians would not consider Ruth to be an important character in history. She's not a leader. She's not a queen. She's not a prophetess of any kind. She's not even Jewish. And in the Old Testament, that's a big deal. She's just this ordinary woman. But then she makes this speech. And because of the speech and the way that she lived out what she said, we are here 3,000 years later in Peterborough being cheered on by Ruth as we seek to follow God. So this is what she says. This is Ruth chapter 1, verse 16. But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. And I would love it if I could now launch into a talk and the title of the talk was something like "How to Get Friends Like Ruth." How to get some best mates who are just going to have your back all the time, and how to never be lonely again because you've attracted all these amazing friends. And that's how I used to think friendship worked like that. I used to think the key was I've just got to make myself really attractive, really appealing, and then I'll attract all of these friends. And I've been discovering that the scripture says, no, it kind of turns that on its head, really. Jesus all the time is saying things like, if you want to save your life, the way to save it is to lose it. If you want to find self-fulfillment, the way to self-fulfillment is self-sacrifice. And it's true, the same thing applies in friendship. If you want to discover great friendships, the key, the real secret is not trying to attract great friends, it's trying to be one. It's learning how to be a friend. So the purpose of this talk is not how to find a Ruth, it's how to be one. How to be a Ruth. How can I be great friends to others? If I look at the world around me and I see that there's loneliness everywhere, how can I not just alleviate my own loneliness, but change the loneliness of another person? And in this little speech that Ruth gives, you find the clues to how to be a great friend. She says this, I will go with you, I will stay with you, I will die with you. We'll take them one at a time. I will go with you. What does that mean? What's that about? I just need... for a moment, everybody here and in the big top, if you are currently dating somebody and they're here with you, can you just stand to your feet for me now? Just stand up wherever you are. If you're here and you're dating someone and they're here too. Now guys, everybody else, here and in the big top, everybody else just look around at the people who are still sitting on the floor. These are the people that are available to you. These are the single people, okay? So have a look around, see if you can find someone you like the look of. Now, a little piece of advice. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you this. Stay standing, couples. But my encouragement would be, over the next little while we're here at Soul Survivor, to try and never put yourself in a situation where it's just you and a couple. Some of these guys, because what generally happens, this is what I found anyway, is you spend time with a couple, obviously you end up feeling like the third wheel. So you could say to them after this meeting, hey, let's head over to the village screen, we can watch the film, and so you'll go in there and you're watching Paddington 2, and you turn around from the screen and you see that the two of them are not looking at the screen, or they are looking at the screen, but what they're doing is they're watching the film in the reflection that it's making in the other person's pupils. So they're just staring into each other's eyes. And you can think, okay, this is awkward, we're going to have to do something else. Let's all go to Cafe Uno. So you head off to Cafe Uno, the three of you, and there's live music there, and you say, let's dance, and so you're all three of you dancing. It will only take 2 seconds. You know, you think, I need to get a drink, or I need a piece of cheesecake. You pop off, you come back, and before you know it, the two of them are there slow dancing in the middle of the floor. It doesn't matter what the song is. They're slow dancing, and they're staring into each other's eyes. What do? You just have to sort of dance around them, don't you? It's awkward. And then later on, you think, okay, this isn't working. Let's head back to camp. You go back to camp. You're sitting around a little campfire area, and, you know, it's just the three of you, and you look up at the stars for a minute, and then you look back down, and the two of them have gone. And you think, where have they gone? They've disappeared into a tent. You follow them into the tent to see what's happening. The two of them are in there, sitting 3 meters apart from each other, looking into each other's eyes, not opening the fridge door. And you think, okay, well done. But there they are, staring at each other. Okay, you can all sit down, couples. Thank you. And that's kind of how it works with couples. Often, it's like they're gazing at each other. It's just looking at each other like that. But with friends, it's a little bit different from that. The way it works with friends is rather than two people just staring at each other and just absorbing each other, what it is it's like two people standing shoulder to shoulder, side by side. And they're looking at something, but it's something they have in common. Now, of course, the best romantic relationships are based on friendship, so you do that as well. But it's this thing of we have something in common. And one of the things that I've been discovering about friendships is that great friendships are always about something. And you'll know this if it's always about something you have in common. And we'll know this if you've ever been in a situation where you've sat next to someone and you've got nothing in common. Have you ever found yourself in a place like that? I remember Mike and I once did a thing in Canada. He was speaking at all these different churches and I was just hanging around. And we drove across Canada. Canada's big. So we're driving for like 6-7 hours a day. And I was this moody 19-year-old, and I've always been an introvert. So I found myself in this car sitting next to this middle-aged woman who just wanted to talk to me. And I was dying. I remember for the first day, I tried so hard to be polite and just to make conversation. And the second day, I really tried. But by the third day, I was like, this is it. I just can't do this anymore. So I decided the most loving thing I could do is just put my headphones in and pretend I was listening to music for 6 hours. And it worked. She had to talk to Mike instead. He's an introvert. He just didn't have any headphones with him. And I found myself just like, why would I? There's nothing we've got in common, lady. And you'll find yourself in positions sometimes where you're sitting next to someone, okay, there is literally nothing we can relate on. But friendship's like the opposite of that. You find somebody and you're like, oh, you like that too. Oh, you're into that band, or you're into that team, or you love playing that game, or whatever it is. It's like it begins with this simple discovery. Oh, you too? You like that too? And then it just grows from there. Now, one of the implications of that is that the way to find a great friend or be a great friend to somebody, it's not simply about getting our phones and just scrolling through our contacts and be like, I'm just going to choose a victim. Who am I going to be a Ruth to? Here we go, number one, right? It's not that. It's something you discover in another person. And one of the things that we probably shouldn't be surprised by, but maybe we are, is that we will find the strongest friendships that we develop, I suspect, will be where those common interests, so you like the same sports or whatever, music or video games, where those common interests are overlaid by our supernatural interests. Again, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're sitting like on a bus or a train or whatever, next to someone you don't know, and then suddenly you realize they're a Christian? Like they do something that gives it away. So they're listening to like Bethel music or whatever, or they get out like a Christian book or a Bible, and then you've got that moment of, do I tell them? Do I tell them that I'm one too? How should I tell them? Should I say, I've read that book? Or should I say, you call me out upon the water? Should I just start singing it and see what they do? But like, when you tell them, have you done that? When you tell them and suddenly they're like, you're a Christian too? And then you connect right away. Oh, where do you go to church? Oh, how did you become a follower of Jesus? And it's almost as if I found it, even with believers on the other side of the world who've grown up in cultures that are so different from ours, within a moment there's a connection. It's almost as if you're brother and sister because you actually are. Because there's this deep connection. You follow the same God. You've got the same spirit living inside of you. So it shouldn't surprise us that often our strongest friendships will be where those supernatural interests and those natural interests overlap. Obviously, we take the mick out of each other publicly as much as we can, but I don't think it's a secret that Mike and I are close friends, best friends, really. And shut up. One of the reasons it works is because he's shaking his head. He's shaking his head. One of the reasons it works is because we love the same things. We play squash together, or rather, I play squash and he sort of ambles around a court and loses. But we love competition. We love the same sort of stuff, reading and stuff like that. But also, we're committed to following the Lord together. And we know he's placed the same call on our hearts. And there's a tremendous strength in that. And what I'm saying is, Ruth and Naomi, it wasn't that Ruth said to Naomi, okay, let's just sit here by the side of the road and let's be friends. What she said was, let's go somewhere together. Let's go on an adventure together. We're looking at the same goal. We've got the same purpose. At its simplest, it's just a common interest. At its deepest, it's a shared purpose that God gives us. And so one question just to be asking as we're considering who are the people I'm going to be a Ruth to is just the question of who am I going to go with? Not just what am I going to do, but who am I going to do it with? Who am I going to go with? I'll go with you. I'll stay with you, says Ruth. And it's so easy to miss what a massive statement that is that Ruth makes, because there's lots of reasons for Ruth not to stay with Naomi. Reason number one, Naomi is telling her to go away. She's like, no, don't come with me. Stay here. That's a pretty good reason to not stay, right? And so reason number two, Ruth has not got a lot of prospects. If she heads back to Israel, she's going to be a foreigner there. She's not going to know anybody. Her chances of her getting a husband, and this is a culture where to have a husband was to have security, are slim to none from her point of view at that moment. And then lastly, Naomi's name, she changes it. So Naomi means pleasant. But when she arrives back in Israel in chapter 2, they say, oh, Naomi, it's so nice to see you. We haven't seen you for years. And she says, don't call me Naomi anymore. Don't call me pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter. So she's a bitter old lady. Like, is that the sort of person you want to make? I definitely want to hang out with you. Like, what's your name, old lady? My name's Twisted and Bitter. Okay, let's spend some time together. Like, you don't do that, do you? And so Naomi's life has gone very wrong. And so for Ruth, that's not an easy decision to make. And yet what she does is she says, I'm going to stay here. And again, this is one of the things for us as we learn how to be friends to other people, is understanding that friends stay. When everybody else is walking out the door, friends walk in. If we want to know who we're friends to, it's not the people that we admire, Because when we don't admire them, when the thing that we admire about them is gone, we just wander away. The people who we're friends to are those for whom, when life goes wrong, when their health goes bad, or they start struggling with mental illness, or something goes wrong in their family, or they don't have the money they used to have, we're still there for them. Those are the people that we're friends to. And one of my favorite images, it's one of the only ones I can think of for this particular, what's happening here in Ruth and Naomi in this moment, comes from the Lord of the Rings. And I know the Lord of the Rings films are old, so probably a whole bunch haven't seen them. If you haven't seen them, just a little spoiler alert, it's about a hobbit called Frodo who throws a bad ring into a volcano. But it takes him about 12 hours to get to the volcano. So it's a very long journey. And if you haven't seen this particular scene, fear not, because I will act it for you now. All right, there's this moment where, yeah, that's right, you should be excited. There's a moment where Frodo is kind of, this is in the first film, he's kind of realizing that this ring is evil and it's going to corrupt everybody, like his little gang that he's traveling with. And so he decides the best thing he can do is go it alone. He's like, I'm going to have to just abandon all these people, and I'm going to have to sneak off and go to Mordor by myself and throw the ring in the volcano. So there's this particular moment where these orcs attack them, and Frodo's like, this is it. This is my chance. And so he sneaks off to the river where the boats are, and he gets in one of these boats, and he starts rowing away. But what he hasn't reckoned with is his best friend, Sam. Now, Sam twigs in the chaos. That's right, he is exciting. Sam twigs in the chaos, Frodo's disappeared. And so he rushes down to the banks of the river and he bursts through the trees. And as he bursts through the trees, he sees Frodo in this boat already rowing away into the distance. And so Sam shouts at Frodo, Mr. Frodo, not alone, Mr. Frodo. And then it's this close-up shot of Frodo, as he's rowing. He's got tears in his eyes and he just goes, no, Sam, no. And then Sam runs, he looks at the boat in the distance, he looks at the water and he just throws himself into this river. He starts wading towards Frodo. And then Frodo goes, I'm going to Mordor alone, Sam. I'm going alone. And he says, of course you are, Mr. Frodo. And I'm coming with you. And then he carries on going. And Frodo says, go back, Sam. Go back. You can't swim. And Sam goes, boo, because he can't swim. And he started to drown. And then Frodo realizes what's happening. He stands up in the boat. He yells at him, Sam, Sam. And Sam goes, boo. And you see this, suddenly the camera shot changes and it's Sam and he's under the water. And it's like he's sinking under the water. His kind of hand reaches up to the surface and you think he's going to die. This is it. This is the moment. And then at the last possible second, Frodo's hand plunges into the water. It grabs Sam. He lifts Sam up onto the boat and the two of them sit there coughing and spluttering. They've got water and tears pouring down their faces. And then Sam, when he recovers his breath for a moment, he looks at Frodo and he says, I made a promise, Mr. Frodo. I made a promise. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee. Don't you leave him. And I don't mean to. Yeah. And here's the point. We're to be Sam. To be a Ruth is to be like Sam. Because what will happen is, I don't know why we do it, but we do. When we go through something that's difficult, even as Tim was describing yesterday morning, the temptation is to isolate ourselves, to get in the boat, to row away. Maybe we don't want someone to see our shame. Maybe we don't want to be a burden to people, but often what we do is we withdraw. And what friends do in that moment is they pursue and they say, no, I'm going to stay with you. It's important to understand what they don't do. And this is a mistake I think we can make for the best of reasons. But we can think our job as friends is to fix my friend. So my friend is struggling with an addiction, or they're struggling with self-harm, or they're struggling with depression, or their parents have got divorced, and life has taken a turn for the worse. Maybe my job is to fix them. That's not our job. That's a burden too heavy for us to carry. Only the Lord can heal. Only the Lord can do that. But what we can do is we can stay. So Sam didn't say to Frodo, let me take the ring. He just said, I'm going to come with you. Ruth didn't say to Naomi, hey, Naomi, I'm going to sort your life out. Don't worry that you're feeling bitter because I'm going to make you feel better. She didn't say that. She just said, I'm going to stay with you. And our role as friends is simply to say, in the midst of all of these problems and in the midst of all of your difficulty, I'm not going anywhere. There's a power in that. It's transformational. I remember, again, when I was a student, I was in the bar one night and I was talking to a friend of mine called Will. And he'd just been dumped. Anyone been there? And he was not in a good way. And I remember him just describing sort of how he was feeling to me. And he said to me, don't worry, Andy. He was a bit drunk. He was like, don't worry, Andy, I'll be fine. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine. And I said, well, why is that, mate? And he said, because I'm like a castle. That's how I see myself, like a castle. And he said, I've got an outer wall, and I've got an inner wall, and then I've got a keep right in the middle. And he said, sometimes what I do is I let people behind the outer wall. Sometimes I let people behind the inner wall. Nobody ever gets into the keep. I knew exactly what he meant, because I've lived like that for lots of my life. Put the walls up, put the armor on, have the filter there, because if they don't really know me, they can't really hurt me. So I got it, but it's an incredibly lonely way to live. And the invitation for us is to be people who choose to give, as it were, the keys to the keep to a few others, not to everybody, but to a few that we trust. But also, here's the challenge. It's to be people that others can trust. And what that looks like is its commitment. The biblical word for it is a stronger one. It's like covenant. It's like a binding agreement that I will see the worst of you. I will see you on your good days, and I will see you on your desperately bad days. I will see you in your moments of shining glory, and I will see your shame, and I will still stay. What that does for people is incredible. It creates this safe space in a world that's constantly changing. I find it astonishing that simply by choosing to stay with a friend, I can help transform their life. I will stay with you. Now, I don't know this because it doesn't say it in the scripture, but I suspect that Ruth probably went to drama school, because the way that she's constructed this talk is genius. She's kind of building up to this little crescendo. So she says, I will go with you. I will stay with you. I will die with you. And then she goes on and says, and even, in the grave, I'm going to be buried with you, like your corpse and my corpse are going to be friends rotting forever. But the truth is, for her, it is a dying to self. This is not a small decision to walk away from everything she knew, to head off with Naomi to a land that she'd never been to before. This is a dying to self, and that's exactly what great friends do. We die to ourselves. Do you know who teaches us that? Jesus Christ. And the way that he puts it, you can find it in John chapter 15. He says this, starting in verse 12. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Now, we're to lay down our life for his world. But how are we ever going to manage that if we can't lay down our life for our friends? It starts with the friends. It doesn't end there, but it starts there. And how to live a life where it's like a life of sacrifice. Again, Mike said it so well last night. The great expression of love in our culture is not sex, but sacrifice. That's how you love someone. So there's a whole bunch of ways that actually works out practically for us. One of those is, it talks in Romans about being second fiddle to another person. What that basically is it's kind of like preferring another person. Someone once told me that playing second fiddle or second violin in an orchestra is the hardest role to play, because your job is just to make the first violin look awesome. So you're just there in the shadows while they're there in the limelight. You're playing away on your violin and they're doing their thing, but your job is just to add texture so that that person looks amazing. What a picture of friendship that is. For us to be people who rejoice when the other succeeds and weep when they fail. That's one way to lay down our lives. Another way is to forgive. Because any great friendship is going to involve forgiving people, because we're broken and we mess up and we get things wrong. It's just part of the course. Mike mentioned yesterday that he's been best man at 19 weddings. One of those was my wedding. And I remember his speech that he gave, the best man speech. And he had practiced. I don't know if any of you have seen The Vicar of Dibley. It's pretty old. But basically, there's this scene in The Vicar of Dibley, one of the Vicar of Dibleys, where Dawn French is having this dream of a wedding where there's someone that she wanted to marry and it didn't quite work out. And so in the middle of the church service, she stands up and she starts singing, "It should have been me." Mike decided that he was going to sing that during his best man speech. True story, right? So he got the ushers and he got all the bridesmaids, and they had a little practice before the service, before the dinner. And then we were there at the wedding dinner, and Mike gets up to speak, and he says, towards the end of his speech, he kind of came in and he started saying, look, I'm in my 50s and he's in his early 20s. And the truth is, there's an order of things. And actually, maybe Beth should have married somebody else before she married Andy. I've been waiting around for a long time. To be honest, I think she should have married me. And at that point, he stopped. And this music to this song was meant to kick in. But the speaker broke. And so he's just standing there where there's hundreds of people staring at him. Now, obviously, everybody who knows Mike was like, okay, there's a punchline coming. My grandma was like, what the heck is happening here? And then finally we managed to get the music kicking in and, they all got up and danced. But I remember afterwards, Mike and I had to have a few words about nearly killing my grandma at the wedding breakfast. And over the years, with any friendship, you have to work stuff through. You have to choose to have honest conversations. You have to choose to forgive. There's always a cost to forgiveness. It's always a dying to self. When you'd rather pay somebody back, it's always hard to let it go. That's how great friendships grow. They're kind of like a team of two great forgivers. Final way that you can die to self is to speak truth to people. Tim talked about this. To actually tell people truth in love and in kindness, but because you're for them, not because you just want to get one over on them, but because you care about them so much you can't see them head off on a track that's not the right track. And again, I'm so grateful that I'm using Mike as an example because you guys know him, that I have Mike who does that for me. So I remember I think it was about a year after I left university, I still remember we were driving along in this car somewhere, and I made this comment, and it was kind of like, I don't know, dismissive and not very nice about a certain person. And I remember pausing and then just saying to Mike as we carried on driving, do you know what, mate? I think I've become quite proud. And do you know what he said? He said, yeah, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. And it was like, ouch. And then we went on to have quite a conversation, the git. I remember also when I was speaking somewhere, and I was really nervous. I was doing this whole series of talks at university one time, and he came along with me to support me. And there was like a talk that I gave, and then there was a Q&A afterwards. And I said to him, have you got any feedback after the talk? Can you help me improve it? And he said, oh, you did all right in the talk. And then he said, to be honest, Andy, in the Q&A, you came across as a bit of an idiot. And then he did an impression of me, like a full-blown, proper, exaggerated impression, at which point I felt like a complete idiot. But I knew that he was, do you know what I mean? I know that he's for me. I know that he loves me. I'm so grateful that he tells me the truth, because then I grow, and iron sharpens iron. And so it's for us choosing to be those friends for others. Like one of my other great friends that I would count on this, just a small number, is a friend of mine called Patrick. He led me to Jesus. I was kicking and screaming. I didn't want to come. He dragged me to Jesus when I was 16 years old. We're still the best of friends all these years later. Now, in that instance, we've gone off in separate ways. He lives in a different part of the country. He's doing a totally different thing from me. But I know we're committed towards the same goal, which is we both want to go for it wholeheartedly, all in for the rest of our lives with the Lord. And we'll spur each other on and challenge each other and pray for each other. He texts me every time I speak at Soul Survivor. He's always trying to hear the Lord for me and I for him. And it's a mutual thing. You see, it wasn't just Ruth for Naomi. Then what happens is if you read the rest of the book, Naomi spends the rest of the book trying to serve Ruth and trying to prefer Ruth. Finally, I'll go with you, I'll stay with you, I'll die with you. Sounds pretty hard, right? That's a lot to be able to do for another person. Our hope is not that we're going to be able to decide to be incredible Ruths for everybody. Our hope is to understand who has become our friend, the greatest of friends. We just had a whole bunch come to meet that friend for the first time. And it's remembering that he has loved us. And from there's a place of strength. And so let me just finish by reading you one last little verse. Jesus says this. John chapter 13, starting in verse 34, he says, "A new command I give you, love one another." And then he's really specific about the sort of love that he wants us to show to each other. He says, "Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." So in that verse is the great secret to being a friend. Love one another as I have loved you. That's really different from how we normally do it, because the way we normally do it, this is certainly the way I've done it, is I love you how you love me. So if you love me well, then I'll love you back. If you don't, then I won't. So if you say something nice to me, I will return the compliment and say something nice to you. If you do the washing up one day when we're camping, I might do the washing up the other day when we're camping. If you buy me a birthday present one year, I will buy you a birthday present the following year of a similar monetary value. And I will love you how you love me. But that's not what it says. What he tells us is I'm to love you how he loves me. To forgive even if I don't want to. To stay even if I don't want to. To prefer even if I don't want to. To love you how he loves me. And here's the final thing on it. As we choose to do that, what happens is not that this becomes two people having a great friendship, but the world outside is changed. Because the world that we're living in is a world that is literally dying in loneliness. There is no greater antidote to a world dying in loneliness than a church that understands how to do friendship well. Jesus, did you pick it up there? He says, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. Not as you kind of like have the sound and lights display in the great worship, but as you love each other, everyone will know you are my disciples. How do we do it? Be a Ruth. Amen.